this morning, you're not going to really need your Bibles. Sorry.
Okay.
I said last week we're going to start speeding things up a little. And I hope you read Genesis 14, because I'm going to talk about it. And we're going to start trying to cover sometimes 2 chapters in a week. This week it's just 1. This is another one of those chapters where we don't know how long it's been since the last chapter. Okay? In Genesis especially, that is very common. When we can't identify it, I try to help you. I try and give you some timelines as we're going through this. I don't do it for everything. I tried to do it for this one. I failed. I couldn't figure it out. Okay? But we're going to see a story about some kings doing battle. And Lot gets caught up in it. The king of Sodom was one of the kings. Lot was living in Sodom. And we'll call them the bad kings. I don't know, maybe we should call them the bad and the badder. Or, whatever. But Lot was taken captive. And so, as the story goes, we have these kings join together and they attack these kings. But what does the word king mean in Abraham's day? A governor, that's a good word. Big shot. Probably the richest man.
It would have been whoever was strong enough, powerful enough to guide and hold.
Strong enough, powerful enough. Somebody that people would follow. Okay, so these kings joined forces, and we had multiple kings and multiple kings. So the king leading this group of kings must have been the biggest and strongest. How big were their armies?
How many people they could control.
So yeah, how many people can they control? But we have a pretty good idea. Not the Bible, historians will tell us. Because when we say there were 3 kings and their armies joined forces and attacked, how many troops did those 3 kings combine together?
Probably no more than about 50 to 100 per king.
50 to 100 per king? Oftentimes that was true. A really big king might have 1,000 trained fighters. At this time, probably more like 100 or less. Maybe a big one, 300. Or a really big one, 1,000. And Egypt, a lot more than that. But in the promised land, which is not yet given to the Israelites, because the Israelites haven't been created yet, we're talking just 3 kings joined together. Maybe they got 300 men, maybe 1,000. Okay? So these kings joined forces. Let's take the strongest case. They might have had somewhere from 1,000 to 10,000 men. I really think more like the 1,000. And what do we see? These kings are fighting over control of what? Just the people. And maybe they conquer a city, they can grab a little loot. And in the story, Moses is writing this and he mentions the tar pits. I don't know why. They're not a significant part of the story, except you don't want to get stuck in tar pits when you're trying to fight an enemy or trying to run from them or run after them. Tar pits, that's like a no-no. Evidently, those tar pits, think about this. I'm trying to teach you how to study the Bible. Tar pits are what? Why are they in here? Because that was a location that the Israelites probably could identify. I can't tell you where they were. I can give you a rough idea. But all of this story takes place in what we call the central part of Israel during, say, King David's time. Nearish to Jerusalem. Some of it south of Jerusalem, some of it north. So, anyway, Lot is captured. Now, somebody escaped. We don't know who. Probably one of Lot's men, because he ran to Abram. At this time, just Abram. He ran to Abram and reported, Lot's been captured. Now, I don't know about you, but Abram was a man, an independent. He had his herds and his flocks and his people. He had money. We already saw he had great wealth of silver and gold. He had great wealth in animals. But the Bible in this story tells us he had 316 trained men. That means men trained to fight. He probably had more that were herdsmen, but you know, that's like asking Farmer Brown, who's never picked up a shotgun in his life, to go take out an enemy sniper, you know. You don't want to take the untrained soldier into a battle. That's dangerous. That's why we go through such great effort to train our soldiers. I mean, I spent 2 months just learning how to march in formation and do push-ups, if you're naughty, and shoot guns. That's all I did for 2 months, just to get through basic training. And then we had advanced training. Okay? Abram had 316 trained men. Now, what's the human nature say? Well, these enemies, they probably got 1,000 soldiers, warriors. I got 316. What am I supposed to do? But that isn't what Abram did. He took his 316 men and took off after the victors, because they had Lot. He wasn't afraid. Now, most of you have probably heard this story before, and we know that Abram won. The Bible tells us how he won, although I've never heard anybody preach it. I mean, they read it, but they don't tell you. How did Abram win? He used his brain. 316 men. How did they attack 1,000 men? I hope it wasn't 10,000, but okay, even 10,000. How do 316 men attack? They did it, what? In the middle of the night. Soldiers are asleep. You attack, they wake up, they're in panic, confusion. Oh, there's 100,000 men attacking us! Ah, run! And 316 men can rout a much bigger force. That tactic was used before this. It's used today. You attack someone in the middle of the night, if they aren't ready for it, that's why soldiers have guards on the outskirts and on patrol. If you can get past those and cause enough panic, because, let's say you got 1,000 men, you don't have 316 men on guard duty, okay? So 316 men can overwhelm a few guards and run right into the camp and causes chaos. And Abram won. And so the king of Sodom says, well, you can have your share of the loot. And Abram says, no, I'm not taking anything except Lot. What's his, I'll take that back. And oh, by the way, Abram wanted 10%. Why 10%? Because he's going to give it to Melchizedek. Did you know this is where we get the concept of tithing? Is from this story, 10%. It started right here, people. As Abram is coming back home, remember he lived out in the wilderness somewhere near Bethel perhaps, and because he moved around. he's coming by Jerusalem. And the king of Jerusalem comes out to meet Abram. He must have been a significant man, because Abram basically bows down and honors him, and he gives him the 10%. And that king's name was Melchizedek. Now, what do we know about Melchizedek? How many times is he mentioned in the Bible? Huh?
About half dozen.
Half dozen? Not a bad guess. Anyone want to try and name some? Genesis 14, I got that one. You're on your own for the rest.
New Testament.
New Testament, he's mentioned in Hebrews. He's mentioned in Hebrews 5 2 times, in the same story. His name appears 2 times. He's mentioned in Hebrews 6 1 time. And he's mentioned in Hebrews 7 6 times. And, oh, by the way, he's also mentioned in Psalm 110 1 time. So, Ruth, how many times is that?
A dozen.
Counting Genesis 14? 7 times his name appears in the Bible. In Hebrews, we're told that Jesus is like Melchizedek, without beginning and without end. What does that tell us about Melchizedek?
He's older than anybody can remember.
He's older than anybody can remember. And when Moses writes this, he says, he's basically saying, even I don't know when he was born, and even I don't know when he died. Now, building up to this over the last 3 months, I have mentioned genealogies and lifespans. And I'm not going to do this for you, but if you will go back and look, I'm going to tell you that there was one man still alive. You can count and see if there's more than one. There was one man still alive that had been on an ark. And Jewish tradition says that Melchizedek was Shem, Noah's son. Now you think about it, and we are how many years after the flood? I didn't bring my cheat sheet of the genealogies, but we're several hundred years after the flood.
900.
Not 900.
No, Shem lived 600 years after the flood.
Right.
And he was 100 years when the flood happened.
So we are somewhere here around 400, maybe 500 years after the flood. And lifespans now had been dwindling. There was just a couple that lived 400 years, and then some that lived 300, just a couple, and 200. And Abram, anyone remember how long Abram lives? We haven't gotten to his death yet, but
200.
175 years. Most people at this time, at Abram's time, were living less than 200 years. If Shem was there, well, I don't know, Melchizedek, he was king of Jerusalem when my daddy's daddy was just a little boy. It's kind of like a myth. Just a few years ago, the last veteran of the Civil War died. When I saw it in the newspaper, I went, what? And then I got on the computer. Yeah. Wow. That would be, oh my goodness.
He must have been like 12 when he went into the war.
I don't remember the exact specifics. But let's, for ease of calculation, 1850, say 120 years old, that'd be 1970. and he died? I'd have to go back and look it up now, and I didn't. But
Did he, Jason says, did he say that Melchizedek was with Shem? Question mark.
okay, I'll come back. So, in my lifetime, in your lifetime, not sure about the others of you, this Civil War veteran was still alive. Can you imagine what it would have been like to talk to him?
Awesome.
So Jewish tradition says that Melchizedek was Shem. And you sit down and count out the years. I've done it. I didn't bring it with me to this study. I did it in another one. It wasn't important enough in my mind. But Shem lived after Abraham died. That's like, oh my goodness. No wonder they thought he was without beginning and without end. And then when the New Testament comes in and Hebrews writes that, that came out of the Jewish tradition. Okay? I refer to Jewish tradition fairly frequently when I'm talking about Genesis and many Old Testament books. That's because the Jews knew the stories that had been told. And they're written down in other books. I don't hold those books as sacred as the Bible. I don't hold them and say, this book says Shem was Melchizedek, therefore he was. No. If the Bible said it, I'd believe it. But the Bible doesn't contradict it, and it sort of makes sense. Now, who was Melchizedek? We don't really know.
Other than King of Salem.
King of Salem, and he was highly respected, clearly.
Jason said that would mean he was anywhere from 600 to 800 years old.
Yeah, probably less than 800. I don't think he lived that long. But yeah, he was very old for their era and a lot older for ours. So, so the other thing is Melchizedek must have been known from what the Bible's teaching us as a true man of God. Now, I often, when I'm in the New Testament, I often talk about the Apostle Paul. After his Damascus Road conversion experience, do you think he ever doubted God existed? Do you think he ever doubted God's call on his life? Now, think of Shem. Maybe Melchizedek. He lived through the ark. Do you think he ever doubted God? He was a man of God. Well, of course he was. I mean, if you've seen what I've seen, you'd be a man of God too. And that's what he probably said. But you know, what happens after you've been a teacher for a while? Some of the stories I was sharing stories before we started. I don't share those very often. I used to talk about them more. I kind of get tired of them. Can you imagine Shem? Yeah, for the last 400 years, everyone wants me to tell them about the ark. I'm going to change my name to Melchizedek and move to Jerusalem, where nobody knows me. And he did that 300 years ago. How, you hear what's happening here? The Jews say he was greater than Abraham, the father of Israel, the Jews call him. And Melchizedek paid tithes to him. So, according to Hebrews, according to Jewish tradition, that made him greater than Abraham. Not a man to ignore.
He would have been basically the first king, first high priest.
Yeah, in essence, the first high priest. And that's what Hebrews is comparing. Jesus is our new high priest. And he's a priest in the order of Melchizedek, is what Hebrews says. Depends on your translation. Order of, like, high priest like Melchizedek. And what does Melchizedek say to Abraham? I want to read this part to you. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. I'm reading in verse 18. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. That's kind of cool. You know, in my lifetime, this would be kind of like Billy Graham walking up and saying, putting his hand on my forehead and saying, God bless you, and continue on. I mean, what greater man of God has there been in my lifetime? I can't think of anyone I respect more as a man of God. There have been some great ones. Melchizedek, there were probably other great men of God, but the Jews consider him greater than Abraham. And so that's basically this story. That's Genesis 14. I know we didn't cover a lot of Genesis today, but I think that story is worth feeling it. And a man after God's own heart. What an appropriate song. What an appropriate song. If I had chosen 3 songs and the order, it would have been those 3 songs for this lesson. And Judy had not a clue what I was going to say. She probably knew Genesis 14 and that's it.
You
Yes.
know what I find interesting? This implies Salem will later become Jerusalem. And this implies that it has always been a city of God.
Mm-hmm.
Psalm 110:4.
Yeah, 110:4 is the other place Melchizedek's mentioned. But, and Janet is probably going to know the answer to this, but so keep your mouth quiet. Somebody else tell me what Salem means. I don't remember, I did not look it up, I apologize. I looked it up many years ago. I don't know if it's Hebrew, Aramaic, or Arabic. I think it's probably close to the same in all 3. Because in Arabic, they greet each other with a word, well, there's phrases, whatever, but usually there's a word called shalom.
Or Salam.
Or in
Farsi.
Farsi it's called salam. She lived in Iran. So salam, shalom, Salem, they all mean the same thing. And that's what? Peace. Peace.
The greeting in Farsi is Salam alaikum, Shema Chatori.
So,
peace to you, how are you, or how do you be?
So Melchizedek, did he name Jerusalem peace? Was that his desire? Did he choose the city because it was named peace?
Or was the city built up around Melchizedek?
Or was the city built around him and he was a man of peace? So we don't know. But yeah, it's a good observation. Jerusalem has always been kind of the center of God's kingdom. Because before Abram came to the promised land, before the Israelites took possession of the promised land, it was already called Salem. And in the Israelites' time, it was called Jerusalem.
Jason says, "My king is righteous," in Hebrew definition.
Yeah. Yep. My king is righteous. That's Melchizedek. Yeah. So that's the kind of man he was. That sounds to me like a man after God's own heart.